Hello everybody, I'm Coach Tickety, and today we'll be talking about DPS in Season 4 of Overwatch 2 Competitive. Now, there weren't too many changes to DPS in this patch, although the changes that did come through were definitely warranted in my opinion, so we're going to still break down every single hero and talk about why I think they deserve their particular spot on my tier list here. And if you guys like this type of content, don't forget to drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and let us know down in the comments who do you think needs more nerfs or buffs in the DPS line this season. There weren't too many groundbreaking changes here, so would love to know your opinions of where you think balance should be going. Who knows, maybe even the dev team will read some of your comments. And if you're looking for a competitive edge this season, don't forget to check out GameLeap.com. Over on our website, we have hundreds of guides with more being added every single week made by our top level coaches, and these go super in depth. You will find everything there from basic fundamentals about the game to in-depth step-by-step character guides. So whether you're new to the game, picking up a new hero for this season, or really trying to grind out ranked and hit that top 500 spot on the leaderboards, there is something over on our website that can help you reach your goals. So click that link below the video or just head over to GameLeap.com and get your membership started today. Alright, let's jump right into it, starting in the D tier with, of course, our favorite low tier hero, Genji. What can I even say about Genji? He's just too situational and too easily countered to really be a strong pick in many situations, and unless you are extremely proficient on this hero, you're not going to have an easy time even building your ultimate in a lot of situations. And then even with your ultimate, unless you really know what you're doing or you're able to combo with another ultimate like say Nano Boost, it can be hard to even find value with one of his best tools, the Dragon Blade. So yeah, Genji's just too dependent on his ultimate, too dependent on team-wide pressure, and really just too situational to be anything higher than the D tier. Sorry Genji players. Next up is Pharah, and while Pharah can be really strong in the right hands or in very specific situations, in every other situation, it becomes such a burden to try and find value with her. She has a very hard time taking space aggressively since she's so dependent on having really advantageous sightlines from the high grounds or the sky. And in a lot of situations, she almost requires a full-time mercy pocket to really get aggressive or stay relevant during those team fights. So again, too dependent on too many outside factors. But if all those cards do align, Pharah definitely can find a lot of value. It just doesn't happen often enough for her to be any higher on the tier list. And rounding out the D tier is going to be Sombra, who technically got a buff this patch. Her EMP will now disable Mei's Blizzard, which is actually kind of a cool counter ultimate, but let's be honest, how often are you going to pick Sombra as a counter to Mei? And Sombra is really just that, a hero that you pick as a counter to other heroes like Doomfist or Wrecking Ball, anyone who's very dependent on their cooldowns to find value. Sombra's great in those situations, but she's otherwise fairly lackluster since she doesn't do a lot of damage, is too dependent on that EMP, and of course whenever she gets forced out by her translocator, has a very hard time rejoining the fight. Moving up to the C tier, we're going to start off with Bastion. Bastion's value really all comes down to his one ability, his turret form, and if he doesn't find value there, he basically becomes half a hero outside of those opportunities. This makes counterplaying a Bastion fairly simple to accomplish. If he's in its turret form, don't fight him. Otherwise, he's very easy to get aggressive on and close the distance against him since he won't be doing as much damage as pretty much any other DPS in the cast. He's also got a very cool but somewhat hard to use ultimate. You're not always going to find a kill with his artillery strikes. You're better off using it to force enemies out of cover or into open space where your teammates can clean them up. Next up is going to be Echo. I like to think of Echo as this sort of hybrid between Pharah and Genji. She's got the poke spam pressure of Pharah as well as the aerial mobility, but she really likes to look for assassination attempts similar to Genji when he's looking for his dash. Unfortunately for Echo, we put both Genji and Pharah in the D tier, and Echo's only marginally better than both of those heroes, and again is very mechanically demanding and needs to find a lot of value from her focusing beam as well as her ultimate the duplicate to really be a strong member of her team. You can definitely find a decent amount of pressure from Echo by just sitting back and spamming your primary fire and sticky bombs into the enemy team, but you really need to be finding kills with those focusing beams and using your mobility aggressively to get the maximum value out of this hero, and both of those things are very hard to play for and very mechanically demanding, so Echo's really not for everyone, but can definitely shine in the right situations. Moving up to the B tier, starting with Hanzo. Hanzo's a very solid middle of the pack character to me. He's got a lot of tools, he's got a lot of damage, he's got his one-shot potential, he's got some mobility, he's got a decent ultimate, but overall he's not that consistent of a damage dealer since his projectiles can be very hard to hit beyond medium or even sometimes close range. This means that in the right hands with the right mechanics, Hanzo can absolutely pop off and dominate a lobby, but for a more average player, he's kind kind of just that, just average. So not the greatest, not the worst, just kind of middle of the pack for Hanzo. And speaking of average, we now get to talk about one of the 2 DPS that got changed this patch, and that's of course Cassidy. All the way down in the B tier, how far he has fallen. These changes to Cassidy are massive. He got some insane nerfs that really brought him in line with more of the DPS cast, so let's talk about them. His base health has been reduced down to 200 like almost everyone else in the DPS line, so he's not slightly tankier than your average DPS hero, and the damage from his magnetic grenade has been reduced down to 120, which means he will no longer one-shot 200 HP targets with a magnetic grenade and a body shot. You'll need to either hit 2 body shots or a headshot to finish those targets now. He is still one of the better DPS at fighting in that close to mid-range, since the magnetic grenade is still very threatening and the shots from his revolver still pack quite a punch, but now he should be much easier to punish with that health nerf as well as the burst damage nerf to his magnetic grenade. You can actually fight this character now and not lose every single time, so he's definitely more in line with more of the cast. Again, sort of middle of the pack similar to Hanzo. Next up is Mei, and while Mei hasn't really seen any changes other than that Sombra buff that we saw, EMP will now destroy Blizzard again, so she's still just Mei. She's great in close quarters, she's great when her wall finds value, but she's still going to struggle against anyone with long range or anyone with mobility that can outplay her walls. So easy to find value with in the close range, but getting up close is going to be the hard part there. So unless you're playing with a really strong synergistic composition or against enemy heroes that are all close range just like you, it can be difficult to be consistent with Mei, but in those right situations, she'll do great, just like she did before. Next up is Reaper. And again, similar to Mei, he's a little bit too dependent on getting up close and personal with his opponents. He does have more tools here. He's got his teleport and his wraith form to stick on those targets, but it is also fairly easy to force out those cooldowns with just damage or scout out his very telegraphed teleport animation and make sure that you've got some distance against him. So if you can get your enemies off guard or get a really strong Death Blossom off, Reaper will absolutely shred, but otherwise it can be pretty easy to counter him as long as you can see him coming. Moving on, let's talk about Symmetra, and Sim is always kind of a weird DPS to talk about. She has a lot of poke damage if you can hit those slow moving projectiles, she has a lot of ramping damage if you can stay up close for long enough, and she's got really crazy mobility potential with her team-wide TP if you can find a team that will actually take it. So a lot of what ifs with Symmetra. If you find yourself in those situations though, she can be a great addition to any team composition. The question is really whether or not your team will work around you to make that value come to life. Rounding out the B tier, we have Torbjorn, and I think Torbjorn's in a fine spot right now. He's kind of a good counter pick to enemy heroes with mobility since his turret will shut down flank angles and things like that, but otherwise his damage is pretty inconsistent. You might hit the odd hot Cheeto from across the map or so, but other than that, he really only finds consistent damage in the close range and when his turret is popping off. So you don't always get to choose your strongest moments as Torbjorn, you're kind of just along for the ride, but you do dish out fairly good damage when those situations pop up, and your ultimate can also be very strong at commanding space for your team. So decent pick, but not always the best situationally. Moving up to the A tier, we're going to start with Ashe. With Cassidy no longer being the best pick in almost every situation, there's definitely a lot more room for Ashe to shine this season. With a lot of burst potential from her rifle, as well as the AoE burst potential from her dynamite, Ashe is pretty well suited to go up against pretty much any opponent. As long as she can keep them at range and she doesn't need to get too close to them to deal damage, she will feel comfortable in almost any setting. Just make sure you're using that coach gun to reposition up to high grounds and keep your enemies at bay, otherwise you'll be struggling to deal with any of those close range damage dealers that can get on top of you. Oh, and in case you didn't know, this was listed as a bug fix, not an official change in the patch notes, but Ashe will no longer charge her ultimate while Bob is actively on the field. So it used to be the case where you could start building a second Bob while Bob was still out shooting your opponents, but now Ashe will have to wait like everyone else for that ultimate to end before she can start charging her next one. This shouldn't change too much about Ashe's game planning or anything like that, but you'll probably get a few less Bobs in your games. Next up is going to be Junkrat, and while it can be difficult to always hit the target you're aiming for as Junkrat, his damage is insanely consistent, especially against enemy tanks in the front line, and he can just absolutely shred through everyone without even putting himself in danger. He's also got decent mobility thanks to his concussion mines, and I guess some crowd control in his trap to help mark flank routes on his rear or things like that, and of course a very powerful ultimate in the Riptire. This is so much stronger than other explosive ultimates like Diva Bomb or things like that, since he can actually control it and actually outplay his enemies while he's using it. Just make sure you're not sitting out in the open when you're casting it. Next up is Widowmaker, and I initially had Widowmaker lower on this list, but she really is just so much of a threat, especially in the right hands, to ever be ignored, so I'm going to keep her up here in the A tier. Widowmaker's threat is really just so much more consistent than any other other sniper in the game right now. She can actually hit a one-shot kill on 200 HP heroes, unlike Ashe or Sojourn, and unlike Hanzo, she has a hit scan rifle, which makes it a lot easier for lining up those headshots. She definitely can't be played anywhere though. You definitely need the right setups and sightlines available to you to really find value as Widowmaker, so don't try to pull her out on every map or against every team, but when the situations are just right, you should definitely be looking to take over the game as Widow. Next up, and rounding out the A tier, is going to be Sojourn, and while she is very strong and has an insanely high skill ceiling, she is situationally strong since she's so dependent on that rail charge, and she is of course very mechanically demanding to make sure you can hit all those shots to charge a rail, and then of course hit the rail when it counts. But even if you're not able to hit every headshot as Sojourn, keep in mind that her railgun still does 130 damage to the body when fully charged, so if you can get a DPS or support member to around half HP, you should be able to easily finish that kill with a fairly easy to line up shot. So definitely a lot of strong potential here, as long as you save that rail charge for just the right moment. Alright, let's move on up to the S tier, starting with Soldier 76. While Soldier definitely doesn't have as much burst damage as all these snipers we've been talking about, his damage is incredibly consistent. Pair that with the fact that he did get buffed a little while ago, although you probably didn't notice since Cassidy was still top of the charts in every situation. Now with him gone, Soldier's got more room to play, and he is still incredibly strong, and he shoots like a laser beam. Soldier also synergizes extremely well with any form of damage amplification since he is constantly shooting out those bullets, so anything like a Mercy Pocket or a Zenyatta Discord Orb will make him even stronger in those situations. But even without them, he can get along fine by himself with his mobility, his healing field, and his incredibly powerful ultimate. Even if he's not finding every single kill, he's able to put out very consistent pressure in almost any situation. Definitely a top pick this season in my books. And next up, we finally get to talk about Tracer, and honestly, there hasn't been a time where I haven't thought of Tracer as pretty much a permanently S tier hero in this game. With how unique her playmaking and mobility is, it's hard to see Tracer ever really being bad, even in those times where they've nerfed her damage output. And like I've said, I do believe that dive-centric compositions are going to become more and more popular with the nerfs to Reinhardt and Cassidy this season, so Tracer can absolutely thrive in those types of metas, playing either with or against a dive composition, since she can keep up in either case. If you've never played Tracer before in Overwatch, then I would say there is no better time to dive right into the deep end than right now, since again, in a dive-centric composition, there is no better character than Tracer, and playing Tracer in those settings, it just feels freeing. You can do almost anything and find value, and you can get aggressive almost 24/7 with divers on your side. So definitely try out Tracer this season. I think she's going to be a hot pick for sure. And that will wrap up my tier list of all the DPS in Overwatch 2 Season 4. And to be honest, I'm just happy Cassidy's not at the top anymore. It was getting so boring playing against that hero in every single game, and really just feeling like you couldn't play anyone else. There's definitely a lot more room for flexibility here, so I'm definitely curious to see how the meta is going to shape up and what heroes become more popular now. If you like the videos we put out on YouTube here, if you find this stuff helpful, then the guides on our website will blow your mind. Over there, you'll find everything you need to become the best player you can be, starting with basic fundamentals and game knowledge, all the way up to in-depth step-by-step hero courses to maximize your playstyle. So what are you waiting for? Click the link below this video or go to GameLeap.com today and get your membership started right now. Anyway, that's all from me today, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.